BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast is back with another episode here. Frank Lanny of the York Daily Record, Mike Gross, and Andrew Klissa here to take you through another week talking Penn State football. Want to give a shout out to the Coaches versus Cancer tournament up in Happy Valley. Always one of the great spectacles on the basketball calendar. Coach Mike Rhodes in his third alliteration of that. Always a great cause. And guys, you know, Coaches versus Cancer comes out of the great Jim Valvano, former Bucknell head coach and NC State Wolfpack fame. Of course, that great moment, him running across court when NC State wins the national championship. Mike, I see you nodding in agreement with the Bucknell head coach. And it's funny, Jim Valvano used to always make trips through Monte City, Pennsylvania, and the coal regions on recruiting trips. And, you know, when he was at NC State, he would always say, nobody complained about his graduation rate when he was at Bucknell.
He was a master of perspective. That let me just point out, I'm going to be a fly in the ointment here. That 1983 national championship game was a lousy basketball game. They had a Kodak moment at the end that everybody remembers. They shot threes and intentionally fouled and beat a really stupid, really talented, but really stupid Houston team that played into their hands. And everybody remembers the Kodak moment at the end of the game. But I'm going to contend it was an awful basketball.
But there were some awful NCAA championship games in that era, wasn't there? Villanova and Georgetown. I mean, I don't even know what years, but I think
that one was awful. I'm going to have to disagree with you there.
Well, defensive, I don't know, man. I love that Houston team. Jim Valvano made me cry. Okay, that night.
Sorry, Frank.
Could not believe.
I love Hakeem Olajuwon. He's one of my all-time favorites, no question about it. But the podcast has taken a strange turn here, hasn't it, Andrew?
Well, I mean, Coaches versus Cancer, Penn State.
Yeah, I know. You made us. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
It happened this weekend. So, you know, it's a natural talking point, you know, to come with the origins and everything. And, of course, Jim Valvano's SB speech, one of the great ones of all time. But, hey, to that Kodak moment, we're a society that now lives our entire lives based on, you know, 30-second attention spans on social media. So why not, if you're going back to the 80s, to live through a snapshot?
A good example of it is that 83 championship.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what we're not living through a snapshot is talking about Penn State football. And I guess you could say we kind of lived through a little bit of snapshots with that. Drew Allar gets a bad rap. You know, where does he rank all time in Penn State quarterbacks? That'll be a discussion for later on. You know, in future episodes of the BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast. But you talk about leadership, and this is the time of the year where leadership is really, really key. And coming out of the Orange Bowl, that devastating loss for Penn State after the Drew Allar interception, Cooper Cousins, freshman, had an amazing year as a freshman, probably one of the most talked about freshmen, at least as an offensive lineman, possibly of all time at Penn State. I caught him in a video that racked up, you know, over 500,000 views on social media. He was the last one to leave the field, letting all the coaches and all the players know about leadership and character. And I said that the team is in good hands going forward. At the Blue-White game, I caught up with Cooper Cousins after the game to ask him about that moment and what was his intention staying on the field down in Miami Gardens. Here's Cooper Cousins.
And really just telling everybody, you know, we got worse. In the next couple of weeks, we have off-season lifted. So, you know, for the guys that are walking off, just trying to keep their head up and say, you know, we got more work to be done, more work to do. And then really just taking my time and just name people like Devon Lee's, Kobe Kings, Sal Wormley, Tyler Warren, guys like that. Just waiting for those guys. Cherishing their moments now for.
He says cherishing the moments of the guys that he really liked. And he mentioned Sal Wormley. And I think Sal's one of the more underrated players, underappreciated players for the last couple of years for Penn State football along the offensive line. But, gentlemen, what does that say about the progression of Penn State football in the James Franklin era to have a freshman in an unsung spot in notoriety-wise along the offensive line be that person down in Miami and going forward?
I think it says more about the kid necessarily than the program. He's an unusual kid. I'm very, very impressed with him. Everything he says, his body language, everything else. And I think he's going to be addition by subtraction kind of based on who's leaving, and I expect him to slot in to that guard spot and be a really good player. And what it says about their program is they have a lot of good offensive line. I mean, I would say 7 of their best 8 or something. 8 of the best 9 are back from last year, and that's the single biggest strength of their team going forward.
Yeah, when you consider when James Franklin arrived, he hardly had any offensive linemen that could play. They had to switch defensive linemen to offensive line.
It was hard to even practice.
It is. And, they kind of made up for it with such elite skill players in the ensuing years. But this is the first time they've really had that combination, to me, of talent and depth across that whole unit. And I think I understand. I mean, some people may not realize. I mean, one of the best offensive lines preseason in the country would be Penn State. I think it's hard to kind of let that sit in your mind. Because when's the last time that phrase has been uttered? But I think it's true. And I think Cooper Cousins is a great, if Penn State isn't trending upwards and maybe Phil Troutwine isn't really getting a lock hold on that position, I mean, do they even get him? Who knows? I mean, he's a PA kid, but there's no guarantee they get him as a player and a leader. And I think the leader part is really impressive because we've met guys who could step in at tough positions young, but being a leader type, and you see that, I think that could be huge for them this year because, he
almost sounds like a coach, the way he deals with the media, the eye contact and the voice and just the way he's like, I'm telling you this because I really believe, he's an impressive dude in that way.
And that's where I'm kind of going with the growth of the program at the offensive line, specifically the offensive line spot being it's an unheralded spot. So for me to have a freshman be that guy at that position where it's so you're coming in and you're pretty much redshirted or you're going to sit for 1 or 2 years until you're ready to play. For him, playing in that role position and getting quality PT time, but not, the full on reps. And for him to be that guy to step up and almost in that moment kind of be the face of the team out in public that everybody could see after that devastating loss, for me, that was huge. And Mike, I agree 100%. It says a lot about the kid as well. But the leadership aspect is just really, really impressive. And I know as we're going through the offseason here and in the summer, we're going to rank Penn State's greatest ever, at least in our opinion, along the positions. And one of those is going to be offensive line. And I think that's going to be the toughest position for people to rank, being that you have great centers, you have great guards, you have great tackles. And everybody knows if you want to be a truly elite football team, it doesn't matter what you have on the edges. If you can't move people off the ball, you're really never going to be an elite football team. And Joe Paterno did it from the 70s and the 80s and the early part of the 90s. And I think when all is said and done, and after I said last week that I poo-poo some of the recent guys in the program and I want to see things go a little bit longer, I think Cooper Cousins, you're looking at a top 10 offensive lineman of all time at Penn State.
Well, here's the other end of this spectrum. It's just something that occurs to me, kind of relatedly to this. The most unheralded, the least talked about, really good player on Penn State's team to me is Drew Shelton. I saw a thing on social media today where people are talking about him like potentially a 1st or 2nd round pick next year, and he plays what is the closest thing to a glamour position on the offensive line, left tackle, and we never talk about him. He's just a quiet guy who does his thing, and the offensive line is like a unit. In some ways, it's like a basketball team. You have to have chemistry and cohesiveness and all that stuff, and so maybe you have to have some guys that are really quiet and low profile and some other guys who are more like Cooper Cousins.
It's a good point. Yeah, Drew Shelton's been impressive in his consistency because in some fashions, him not being mentioned last year was kind of a good thing in a way, right? Because there was questions about his durability and is he a full-time left tackle? Is he that type of guy in the Big Ten? So, I mean, he upheld himself well, and we didn't have to point to him with James. Like, what's going on there? Is he struggling? Is he healthy? Is he this? He just did his job the whole year. And I think it's one thing if you don't have a full complement of offensive linemen, you might need a star, kind of like Olu, to help that may be the case. But when you have the full complement, having just somebody like Drew Shelton there doing the job good enough, maybe even better than that every day, heck with headlines and top 10 picks and all that. I mean, that's what they need, right? That's what they haven't had.
Yep.
And I mean, he didn't get the headlines like Vega does, right? Or Venga, but hey, it's good. That's impressive. And that's going to help Drew Allar become a better quarterback. Potentially it should. And the running backs be better at what they do. And that's why, to me, the biggest reason why Penn State is better now in the preseason than they've been ever under James Franklin is that combination. It's not just they have a great lineman, potential quarterback, first rounder, good running backs. They have all three things together. And I think you have that together. I don't think people realize how that can carry you. Just that combination.
Both of you guys have written about, the early, way too early, preseason rankings. And we kind of delved into it last year on what we thought, where we would slot Penn State. Frank, specifically your article at YDR, and I encourage everybody to go and check it out at ydr.com. You went through and kind of put where every single analyst nationally and publication has Penn State. Joel Klatt having Penn State number one. What jumped out to you the most about what people are saying regarding this Penn State football team? Like, what was the one that was kind of like off the wall that maybe not everybody is talking about?
Everybody that I looked at nationally had them in the top 4. So everybody was really high on them. So there wasn't any kind of weird negatives to me I might have been a little surprised at how well people regarded Drew Allar in those breakdowns, only because he gets so much. He's such a lightning rod in other conversations, right? I mean, you can go on other conversations where people don't believe in Penn State, and it comes to him. And they always, if there is not a play that is more talked about in the last 4 months in Penn State history than that interception in the Orange Bowl, I mean, that's what they go back to. It's almost like some people use that's who Drew Allar is in his whole career. That sums up who he is. And I mean, so that all these other national writers have them really in the top 4 and are lauding him, I thought was, I guess if you're a Penn State fan, kind of a pleasant surprise in that regard.
Yeah, I think probably the difference between having him number 1 and number 4 is probably how you regard Allar. All of those people that you mentioned in that piece, Frank, all of them probably regard Allar a little higher than a lot of the fan social media snarky.
Yes, I get that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of them are saying what you just said a couple minutes ago, Frank. The O-line, the running back, and the quarterback. When the other teams that figure to be top contenders don't have that already in place, the way Penn State does.
Right. Because, Penn State, to me, even when they've had good talent and they've had what we think were really good teams, there's been times where they haven't been able to control games, especially against better opponents in the second half. Say they let games slip away. How many Ohio State games? And I think it's because they haven't had what we're just talking about. They haven't been able to lean on punishing teams with their running game and their offensive line when they need to. Forget Saquon Barkley's great individual efforts. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to put away teams and grind them down when you need to. And to me, that's what's kept them from being elite.
The questions, if there are questions, I would think are more on the defensive side this year. Mm-hmm. But I think probably people kind of vaguely think, well, they've been so good defensively the last couple of years. We know they have athletes. They'll be okay. They'll more or less figure that out. And plus they have Jim Knowles. So I think
Right.
people sort of generally are more apt to give him a pass on that side of the ball.
You're right. I think people are definitely, I'm not saying they can't have another great defense, but I think the one thing that would concern me if I'm a fan is injuries on defense, because there's a couple positions where they're pretty good through at least knowing halfway through the position. But if they would get like a couple injuries at defensive end or defensive tackle to key guys, you could be scrambling, relying on a lot of young players that we don't know yet.
That's true.
To me, that would be, whereas the offense to me has more depth everywhere around.
But Frank, back to your point, when you talk about Penn State being unable to grind opponents down, I go back to the Cooper Cousins discussion and the evolution of the offensive line players that Penn State has gotten under James Franklin. And to me, they should have been able to do it in the past. And I'm not making any excuses. The 2017 Ohio State game, the 2018 Ohio State game, perfect examples of that among a handful more. But if you put this offensive line in those situations, to me, there's no excuse that they should not be able to grind opponents down, especially with the backs that they have. That's just my opinion, and that would kind of
I think that's right. Yeah,
that's what makes this different. So, with all that being said, and about the preseason rankings and where Penn State wants to go, let's do a little fact or fiction here. We throw it back to the old Sports Center days when ESPN was at its heyday. What was it? Cold hard facts. Well, I can't throw out any specific, companies here because it's, an unsponsored podcast and I don't want to get sued for copyright infringement here, but we'll just say some cold hard facts of our own here from the IM lots, the tailgate lots up at Beaver Stadium. Fact or fiction, Penn State finishes better than last season's semifinal appearance.
Wow.
Could it? Yeah, fact could be.
Not could be, fact or fiction.
Yeah, well, fact or fiction. That's a tough one because
that's a really tough one.
Here's the deal. I go fiction only because there's only one step they have to take. I mean, that's hard, right? I think they can do it, but the odds would not be necessarily with them because there's only one more step to take to get to the title game, right?
Yeah, I would, if I was, if we were actually betting on this somehow, I would bet on fiction. I think the odds are with fiction, not because you're not high on Penn State, which is just the reality of the format.
I'm not sure I like that opening question, Andrew, but go ahead.
That was a tough one. It's a zero-sum game. Politics and sports, zero-sum game. There is there is nothing else. So I wanted to start with the toughest one of all. Fact or fiction, and number 2 relates to number 1. Okay. Because I believe if you guys say fact on this, I believe number 1 becomes fact. At the end of his tenure, Drew Allar will be one of the top 10, possibly top 5 quarterbacks of all time at Penn State. Let's give him a little more of a cushion. Top 10 quarterback at Penn State.
I would say fact on that one because I think he's close now. And if he's reasonably healthy next year, this coming season, and even if his improvement is only kind of marginal, he would be in the top 10. That quarterback list is kind of tough. We'll get to that down the road, but that's kind of tough. But certainly I think it's reasonable to say if he takes a significant step forward, then your first question, there's a good chance that's the wild card factor that could maybe make fiction into fact on that first question.
Yeah. Oh, top 10 quarterback in Penn State history? That's a fact.
Yeah, I think
because to me, he already is that, right? So he just has to not regress to be a top 10. But I think to say that I know that they have a really good shot to do better and get to the title game and win a national championship, he's got to be a top might have to be a top 5 quarterback. This isn't John Schaefer.
Yeah, I think that's where Andrew's going to this. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of because everybody has different definitions. So for me, for Drew Allar to become a top 10 quarterback of all time at Penn State, Drew Allar has to win a football game that Penn State was not supposed to win, or is a toss-up equal talent-wise.
Well, this is interesting because when we get to ranking quarterbacks of all time at Penn State, I'm not saying there isn't, but I'm going to really like to see you name 9 quarterbacks or 10 that are better than Drew Allar at Penn State. Not at other places, but at Penn State. That list is going to be interesting at the end. I can't wait.
It's going to be interesting, and it's not a slam on Drew Allar's talent because talent-wise, I would say Drew Allar's probably number 1.
Well, statistically, he's a top 10 quarterback, no question.
And exactly, statistically. But in terms of delivering performances when it matters, I don't think I have him in the top 10 right now. I'm going off the top of my head, and it's borderline. Maybe he's the number 9 for me. Maybe he is, and maybe I'm being too rough on him. Number 8, 9. And I'll just preview it a little bit. Like, Wally Richardson never lost to a team from the state of Michigan. That carries some weight for me. Now, granted, the Western and Wisconsin and stuff like that.
Here's what carries some weight for me. Drew Allar is a better player than Wally Richardson.
I get that.
I mean, that's what carries weight.
I understand that. I also have like a very high appreciation for like the Chuck Fusinas of the world.
Yeah.
And again, going across eras, I think that's tough to judge.
It is really tough to judge. I think this is statistics might be the most deceptive at this position of any. This is almost like this pod is becoming a preview of the quarterback argument, which is okay. That's fine. I think after the top 2 or 3, it's a really interesting discussion. 4 or 5 with the quarterback thing. That's going to be an interesting discussion, but and even the top 2 or 3 are the whole thing will be interesting. But Allar certainly has an opportunity to be in the top 5 and maybe even higher than that based on what happens in the next 6 months.
Right, because it's a position unlike the others where you rate that guy more than any other position, also based on how the team does. Because your big wins, where did they end up? Did they win a national title? Did they come like you're putting a lot of weight on the quarterback, more so than more so than say cornerback than for other positions, right?
Yep, no question. And every other position. I interviewed Andy Kotelnicki for a magazine piece a couple weeks ago, and he said the quarterback is the most important individual on a football team. The most important position group on a football team is the offensive line.
This kind of just sums up the first 20 minutes of this podcast. Quarterbacks and offensive line.
Yeah, we covered it. I think we covered it. That was a summary. That was my thesis statement for this podcast.
Fact or fiction? James Franklin's reputation on the national scene changes for next season with a similar performance as last year.
Changes with a similar performance.
What does that mean? Like that he loses to Oregon and Ohio State but wins every other game?
If they lose to Ohio State in the regular season or lose to Oregon and beat Ohio State, if they finish where they got to last year, beating of a Boise State, beating of an SMU, and then lost in the semifinal, or it just loses in the semifinal. Let's forget about wins. Let's forget about the wins. If they lose in the semifinal again, say as a top 4 seed, because even if they beat Oregon and Ohio State and they lost in the semifinal, Oregon and Ohio State and they lost in the semifinal, there's going to be people that say St. James Franklin couldn't win the biggest game of the year.
Yeah, I think that scenario that you just gave, in that scenario, I don't think his reputation changes much. I think it maybe goes down a little bit in that scenario. I sort of feel like in the last year, Franklin's reputation nationally has improved slightly because the games that they lost in the last year, I don't think it's as easy to blame it on coaching as it was some of the other past infamous losses. And I think people now perceive him as a guy who really knows how to build a program. I mean, they're recruiting and transfer portal and all that stuff, hiring and firing coaches, which is one of the most important things those guys do. All of that stuff, I think his reputation has gotten a little better.
Yeah. I would agree with that. The thing is, everybody jumps on. I mean, to some degree, it depends on how the playoffs would go. I mean, I know that's a cop out, but if suddenly Cade Klubnik or whatever is like the next coming at quarterback and Clemson can't lose a game, and that's who Penn State loses to in the semifinals, 39-32, if you've already beaten Ohio State once or twice and took care of Oregon at home, maybe he can improve. I guess you're right, though. I mean, he's in a tough position because maybe he has to literally go to the national title game at least, if not win it, to really get what you're saying, to have certain people have his reputation improve. That's a kind of a tough spot to be in, but isn't that kind of what Dabo Sweeney went through, and other coaches, right? They get you're good, but if you're good, but you can't break through, you're not going to it's never going to relent for you until you do. They could play Ohio State 3 times this year. That's the other thing. It's not anymore Penn State where you get one shot at Ohio State and that's it. Like the way it's set up with the Big Ten championship game now and the playoffs, they could play them multiple times. So maybe it's just whoever you beat last is what matters in that.
Yeah.
These are tough questions. I don't know if number 4 gets any easier. I've been trying to stump you guys. You guys are experts. I'm trying to stump you.
No complaints, big guy. Bring it.
We're going to the email list. Don't forget, email the show, bluewhitetailgatepawcast@gmail.com. This one comes from Gabby in Pennsylvania. Guys, new to the pod, answer this question. How long, fact or fiction? So I'm going to put a time limit on Gabby's email. In 2 years, Penn State, will they come into the 21st century and wear true alternate uniforms? The generations of greatness are a nice touch, but I'm talking full-blown alternates like Oregon or some vintage Florida like Tim Tebow wore coming out perfect. Obviously, Gabby, big Tim Tebow fan. But yet a Penn State fan, or at least married into a Penn State family right there.
Yeah.
So, fact or fiction, in 2 years, now that there's a stadium sponsor, West Shore Home Field at Beaver Stadium, all these luxury boxes, got to increase revenue. Fact or fiction, 2 years, Penn State has a true alternate uniform.
True meaning substantially different from the regular uniform.
Yes, not a hybrid DNA of all these other uniforms that never evolved outside of a pink stripe and a great face mask.
Well, I would argue that is a possibility. To do that for one game or something like that. I've never really been a fan of Penn State's uniforms particularly. So it would not be a horrible thing for them to do alternates to me, although in general, I'm not a fan of alternates. So, I don't know.
We'll cut there at fiction. It's not going to happen in 2 years.
Okay. Fiction. Yeah. 2 years is a pretty short window. I would say fiction. Yeah.
Because for Penn State doesn't have anything interesting uniform wise in its past. So for them to go complete alternate, it's going to have to be a substantial change. And I don't think they're going there.
Oh, pink and black is pretty interesting.
Oh, blasphemy. No. Also, I'm appalled. Mike, I don't know if you saw my face when you said that, but
I could see black if you're going to do that, right? Almost all black with some pink, but that's not Penn State. They're going to try to be innovative whether it's financial in other ways, but not in that fashion.
Well, Andrew, what did I say that appalled you? That I don't like?
You don't like their uniform.
Well, I think Frank got a kick out of my facial expression.
Yeah. That you're not a fan of their uniforms to begin with.
Oh,
I kind of like the home ones.
The away ones, the true stormtroopers are, Oregon says this and that. The true that's a look. That's fresh, as they used to say back in the day. Fact or fiction? Jim Knowles, caveat, to be fair, with injuries, since Frank, you brought that up, injuries along the defense. Fact or fiction, Jim Knowles puts the best defensive unit on the field this year in college football.
I don't. Fiction. I think they're probably going to be a top 5 defense, but the best? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll say fiction only because I'm not sure he has quite the talent in every position and depth to be number one for sure. No.
You could be, statistics lie too. Statistically, you could be a top 5 defense and actually be the best defense in the country, based on schedules, based on all of that. So I give them some leeway. I'm going to go with fiction. I don't think Penn State has the horses like they had last year. Even though they upgrade in some positions, I just think they lose too much to be able to put the top unit on. But I do see a number 1 ranked defense within 3 years of Jim Knowles being at Penn State.
Okay.
So not next year, but
it'll be interesting to see how they differ in style from the last couple of years.
How they utilize the things that they are really strong at. Like there's certain parts of their defense that I think they could emphasize to maybe make up for others. And that's what you're paying Jim Knowles, to me, $3 million to do, is to take what you got and make the best form of it possible. Like if you're the best coordinator, you can take I'm not saying you got to be number 1, but you got to be able to take what you have talent wise and what you have at your disposal and turn it into the best that you can. And that, to me, I'll be interested to see how he does that, because, they're loaded at certain spots, like cornerback, they're loaded. So how can that affect the whole defense as a whole beyond just, we can cover these guys, right? Can you form that into something beyond just being pretty good at covering guys on the outside when you have literally 5 cornerbacks who are really some of your best players on the whole unit?
Coming out of our Fact or Fiction segment, if Penn State wants to be the top defensive unit in the country and win a national championship, you got to put work in the offseason. And one of the guys in State College that knows very well how that is done is the owner of Victory Sports and Fitness, Rob Oshinskie. He joins the Blue White Tailgate Podcast. Rob, thanks a lot for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, great to be here. Appreciate it.
Rob, you're one of the premier trainers, not only in the state of Pennsylvania, but in the country, up and down the East Coast. You've been around State College for a long time. All-Americans have come to you in the offseason to train with you. Guys from professional baseball to MMA to USA Wrestling come to train with you, both mentally, physically. Take us inside the mind of a Division I athlete when, I know the time limits are a little bit different and facilities around the Penn State football program are a little bit better, but what's going through their mind right now as they're prepping for an upcoming season?
Well, it really depends on the athlete themselves, and I think you can correlate it to any aspect of society. You're going to have a portion of those guys that are really going to be extremely highly motivated, and they don't want to take a day off. And then you're going to have the majority of the team is going to be comprised of guys that will do whatever the team asks them to do. Then you're always going to have some guys that aren't quite as motivated. They need a little bit of encouragement or a little bit of a push. But for those guys who really want to be great, they're the Michael Jordans, they're the Tiger Woods of the world, the Kobe Bryants. They're going to be up at 4:30 in the morning. They're going to get their shots in. They're going to get their swings in. They're going to get their lifts in and do what it takes to get to that level, or at least what they think is going to enable them to get there.
Rob, what can you do? What can you do for a Penn State football player that not that their regular strength and conditioning people can't do, but that enhances what their strength and conditioning staff does?
Yeah, Mike, that's a great point. So listen, first of all, as I'm sure you guys are aware, Division I programs across the country have invested tremendous amounts of money in their strength and conditioning program, and Penn State is no different. And whether it's Chuck Losey or any of the other guys on the staff, these guys are true pros. They do a great job, and they are highly, highly qualified. So what we could do for that Penn State player now versus what we may have been able to do for them in years past is, put it this way, we probably have a smaller window of opportunity to help them. However, the reality is also this: you get 30, 40 guys in a weight room. These guys are human. They're very good coaches, but you're going to miss things from time to time. There's little nuances in technique that you may be able to deal with in a private setting. We evaluate every athlete, every adult that comes into our facility down to some pretty minutia detail. Sometimes that level of evaluation is not always practical in a big setting. And listen, to be honest, it's not necessarily needed. As you guys are aware, the guys that are scholarship athletes at schools like Penn State, they're not Joey Jones that played on your high school team. These are pretty special individuals. Their bodies are capable of doing things that the rest of us could honestly only dream of. I could share some stories with you guys of things that you kind of shake your head. Like, we used to work with a guy named Mike Turgovich. He was a 2-year starter at Notre Dame, played with the Jets, played with the Cowboys. This was a guy at 318 pounds, could jump on a 30-inch box, could bench press with one leg, could jump on a 30-inch box with one leg, could bench 475 pounds, and do a whole bunch of other things that when adult males were in the gym watching these guys train, watching him train, they would just be stopped in their tracks. So I don't want to get too long-winded, but hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah.
Rob, how about either recent former Penn State athletes you have some ties with now? Is there anything you could share with us, that, like, as an example of somebody you've worked with and maybe more recently that has Penn State connections to, have played there or is playing there?
So, Frank, going back about 6 years, we had worked with Paris Palmer in his pro day prep. So one of our wheelhouses is that I have worked with guys doing combine / pro day prep ever since I was at Penn State. So really going back 27, 28 years. So Paris was one of our guys a few years back. He was a guy that I really wish we would have been able to get our hands on him sooner, because he made some really tremendous progress, but we didn't get him until mid-June. Had we gotten him in December, it would have been really cool, because, believe it or not, in the last 2 weeks prior to his pro day, his broad jump went up by 2 feet, which is I'm sorry, 10 inches in the last 2 weeks, which is still a big number, But we had Paris, Noah Kane worked with us a couple years ago. Fatuma Melba worked with us a couple years ago when he was in the portal. Great young guys, worked very hard. But it's the game in which we're all talking about. This is high level stuff, and you got to be really special to get that opportunity. We've had some guys, I could share stories with you guys about their measurables that are really impressive and at some level jaw dropping. But sometimes you have to be that guy. So you guys probably remember Tunch Ilkin, the former Pittsburgh Steeler, who was a great commentator, but he was also a consultant. He was a $5,000-$6,000 a day consultant to NFL teams. And one day when Tunch and I were together, he made a really interesting point. He goes, Rob, listen, for a lot of guys, especially guys that fall under the free agent umbrella, they may have all the physical capabilities, but we are, at the end of the day, we are humans, and coaches are humans, and somebody's got to fall in love with them. And if somebody doesn't fall in love with, if they're not that guy, like we we currently work with Chris Collier, who was the PSAC Player of the Year at Lock Haven 2 years ago and is now with the Raiders. When he went to his pro day at Temple, I was fortunate enough to be allowed to be there and be on the field. And the scout from the Eagles said, listen, guys, when Chris took his shirt off, he had my attention. After he ran his first 40, I was watching every step he made the rest of the workout. And we had similar feedback from some of the other guys, but once they met Chris, they realized that he was the type of guy that could really be an asset in a locker room. And of course, that's something that these guys are gauging on a day-to-day basis. Is this guy going to be a cancer, or is he going to be a positive?
Rob, I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Rob, you've been around State College, for a long, long time. You played at Bucknell. The stories from the 90s and even going back a little bit further to the 80s was kind of legendary with guys. Because of time limits, they would leave, and I think they would go down to work out at like the Lions Den, back in those days and kind of things like that on their own and put in a lot of time. How has it kind of like changed as NCAA rules have changed? Penn State putting in the money, which you already mentioned, but now with high school sports, now you have elite Division I recruits, looking for that extra little bit during the summer and traveling all across the state. And I know some what would be future Penn State guys, future Pitt guys have traveled from all over the state to come to your business. So when you're taking one of those high school guys and trying to work on with what, a D1 program has said they would like them to work on, how does that communication work with you?
So that's a big part of what we do with athletes that are college bound. We talk to them and their parents about the transition to college. So you guys, I'm guessing, have all been to college. You understand what the first days, the first weeks, the first semester is like. It's you're away from home for the first time. There's a lot of new things. There could be some uncomfortable things, and we try to eliminate one of those things, which is the challenge of going into the weight room at first. For a college freshman, if they have a limited weight room experience, which, listen, for some of your listeners, they may be surprised that, especially in sports like basketball, a lot of these young prospects have not spent a lot of time in the weight room. So if all of a sudden they're thrust into that weight room when they get to college, and you have a strength coach who is relatively aggressive and relatively unforgiving, or maybe is getting pressure from the head coach to really push these kids, that transition in the weight room can be a pretty uncomfortable reality. So we try to ease that pain and make that transition as easy and as quick as possible. I think we've done a pretty good job with that over the years. For the high school kids that you're talking about, just like you guys would, they are looking for an edge. We have a kid that I think you guys are going to get to know this name in the future. His name is Jackson Albright. He is a 15-year-old, legit barefoot, 6'5", 293 pounds, and he's pretty athletic. And he drives here from Watsontown, which is a little over an hour away. He drives here 3 days a week. And I'm going to be really surprised if after this summer Penn State isn't actively pursuing him.
Well, nice. He's an offensive lineman, or what do you see?
He plays both, but he's gonna project as an offensive lineman moving forward. He's one of these kids that you look at him and you go, he's 293 because he looks like he's 270, which from a college coach's perspective is a good thing. He is not carrying unnecessary weight. Believe it or not, he was a full-time swimmer 2 years ago and started playing football as a freshman. And as you could imagine, it was kind of a train wreck. But his sophomore year, he started figuring things out. And literally every time he walks into the gym, there's another step forward. And I think he's going to be a kid that is going to get a lot of interest in the coming months.
Awesome.
Since Bill O'Brien came to Penn State, Craig Fitzgerald, I know you spoke very highly of Craig, and you speak very highly of Dwight Galt, who's still in the area. We had him on the podcast last year, and Coach and Chuck. what kind of story, when you guys get together, what's kind of like the funniest stories? Because in my experience, the strength and conditioning staff, they are pretty much outside of the head coach, the most influential person in these athletes' lives. And they also come up with the best stories. So what kind of, when you guys are together telling the stories, what are kind of the funny stories or great stories that you've heard from either of those three strength and conditioning coaches at Penn State recently?
So listen, full disclosure, Chuck and Coach Gall and I, we know each other, but we don't know each other real well. Fitz and I got to be pretty good friends. I was crazy enough at that time to wake up at 3:30 in the morning and go and meet him to work out at 4. But this is kind of a funny story with how Fitz and I first got to meet. So we had a bunch of mutual friends in the area that kept saying, "Hey, you guys got to get together. You got to get together." I'm literally driving down Westerly Parkway one day and the phone rings. I usually don't answer my phone if it's not a number that I recognize. I happen to pick it up and I get, "Hey, Rob, it's Craig Fitzgerald." And we start talking and we just hit it off immediately. He called me about a week later and he said, "Hey, if you're not doing anything, come on up the weight room." So I go up and Craig and I are in his office talking, and literally in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a topic, he stands up and just walks out. And I'm like, "Where'd he go?" Well, he leaves for about 5 minutes. He comes back and he goes, "Listen, just come with me." And next thing you know, and if for those of you who know Fitz or have heard stories about him, he is just a people person. Just started walking me around the football building, introducing me to everybody. And literally 10 minutes later, we're picking his kid up from school at OLV. 10 minutes after that, we're in his basement sitting at the bar in his man cave talking to his wife. So Craig was a guy that was very willing to open up and you could get close to pretty quickly. But most of the stories you've heard about the energy, the passion, the crazy morning workouts, they're all true. And it's also true that he used to fall asleep sometimes at coaches' meetings.
We'll keep that under wraps.
Otherwise, I'm trying to think about, listen, when I was at Penn State, as you can imagine, it was a pretty serious set of circumstances. The weight room was a pretty serious place. Coach Paterno, ran a pretty tight ship. I don't know if I'm going to tell this story in a way that's going to be funny, but it's not so much a weight room story. For those of you who may know Joe Serra, one of my favorite human beings ever. I was fortunate enough to serve with him on the Football Foundation board for a number of years. And Joe was usually up in the press box, and I don't know what he used to do with them, but he as the stories go, he used to have tacks all over the desk. And he calls down to he was seeing a tendency in the offense. And he called down to the field and told them to call a certain defense. They didn't. And the next play, whoever we were playing took advantage of that tendency and picked up 20 yards. And for those of you who may have known Joe is a pretty emotional guy, super passionate about football. He threw a little bit of a fit, turned around and went to smack the countertop, and the tacks were there. And he filled his hands with tacks, and a whole bunch of people from the press were in and around, and he's yelling around, screaming, and somebody started pulling tacks out of his hand. Kind of a funny Joe Serra story. But, honestly, within the weight room, things were pretty serious when I was there. There wasn't a whole lot of messing around and joking going on.
Rob, how does this work with you with Penn State's current players with the coaching staff? Is the coaching staff sending you guys? How does that?
Mike, good question. Typically, no. So again, Penn State has made great choices from the staff to the equipment to the ancillary modalities and training systems that they have there. So the truth is, they don't need Rob Oshinskie and Victory Sports too much, but where the relationship comes in is the Penn State strength staff has been great in the past. When you have a guy that's on a break, like you guys might know the name Blake Zaylor. He was also from Shamokin. Blake was one of our athletes in high school. His story to Penn State was great that I could share with you guys later if you wanted to hear it. But when Blake was on a break, he would tell the staff that he was coming here, and they would be like, don't worry about our stuff. Just go and do what Rob wants you to do. And so I think there's mutual respect there. I know that they do great work, so they don't need me stepping on their toes. And when guys make their way here, they've been pretty supportive.
Rob, thanks a lot for joining BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast. We always love talking strength and conditioning, especially during the offseason and bye weeks, as our listeners know. Rob, thanks a lot.
Yeah, guys, great to be here. Have a great day.
All right, guys, we kind of went from talking factor fiction and Jim Knowles' defense, possibly the factor fiction of Jim Knowles' defense being ranked number one, to talking how Penn State becomes number one as a team with offseason strength and conditioning. Let's talk top number one and top of all time, or Big Ten era wise, Penn State defensive backs. I know we've talked a little bit about it off camera. It's kind of hard to narrow down top 10 quarterbacks, top 10 safeties, because when you think of Penn State, you're not necessarily thinking those positions as necessarily a football factory. So let's start with Mr. Bodani, as you are super high on the defensive backs, not only last year and this year, top Penn State defensive backs in an abbreviated conversation here at the end of this episode.
Okay, so what's really interesting, Penn State's never had a defensive back chosen in the first round of the NFL draft. They came very close with Joey Porter. So they've had great play, but maybe not always the superstars, right? But I guess I hone in on cornerback a little bit from my time covering the team since 94. And of course, Richie Gardner made one of the great plays in Penn State Big Ten history with that interception and touchdown return against Nebraska in 2002. And I still think that was the loudest I've ever heard Beaver Stadium in a moment. But who I would say, I'm just going to go who I like the best. Okay. And that is he's one of my all time favorite Penn State players overall, is Alan Zamitis, AZ, who's still with the team. And I just thought, as a defensive back, he embodied not just the skill, but the toughness that it's like, there isn't any more you would want from that position, right? And big plays. And though they were not always a great team when AZ played, except for his last year in 2005, he made some, in 2005, the strip, sack, tackle, touchdown he pulled off on Chad Henne at Michigan. And in his last regular season game ever, he had 2 interceptions, and he dropped a third that hit him in the gut, I think, at the end. And I just go with him. And Joey Porter is right there with his skill to me, right behind AZ. And lastly, I'll say I'll be interested to see how this season goes, because Penn State has a kid, AJ Harris, who could break that first round drought, so to speak. And I am really curious as how well he plays in his second year at Penn State. How do you like that?
I like it. So you're very cornerback oriented. I think Joey Porter is at or near the top. I think Zamitis is too. If we're going to include safeties, I would include Brisker. I would include Marcus Allen. Justin King is a guy who was maybe not as good as he was expected to be as a recruit, because he was beyond elite as a recruit, but he was a pretty good player. Mm-hmm. Going way back, remember Ray Isom? How about him? He was an excellent player. And going back to the olden days, Franco Harris's brother Pete was a really good safety, who was kind of a ball hawking kind of guy, center fielder, played the pass really well. So it's hard to rank them. It's hard to rank safeties against corners. Those are some names. Those are some names.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first games I ever went to and covered in any fashion as like a part-time guy was early 90s, and Darren Perry had a great game.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one.
He's got to be maybe one of the best defensive backs or safeties in Penn State, at least recent history. So I'll throw him out there.
Who's the safety that came after Brisker? I just can't think of his name.
Jair Brown.
Yeah, he's an American. We got to throw in there.
You didn't let me get there.
Sorry. My bad.
Tig played above his size, maybe better than as well as any Penn State player.
Yeah, he was excellent.
Jair Brown could play in any era of Penn State football. Mm-hmm. On his senior day, us TV guys were always down in the media room before the game. And I never did this before. I saw Teague Brown's family, and the way he carried himself in the media, I almost felt like obligated to go up and talk to his family since they were sitting by me. And I said that to his family, that he could play across any era of Penn State football, and he was literally a joy to cover. And
he was such a good interview that they didn't make him as available as much as they should have, because
that's a great sign of your greatness.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
he was just a little bit too honest. I got him to talk about some things that other guys declined to talk about. It specifically when I wrote a piece about when that guy came in and tried to talk him into joining his union, his players' union. He was the only guy that talked about that. But yeah, he was excellent guy.
Real quick, my top 5 at safety: Darren Perry, Kim Herring. Always loved Kim Herring back in the mid 90s, Super Bowl champion with the Ravens. Mark Robinson back in the early 80s.
Good one. Yep.
I would like to put Ray Isom on the list because Ray feared nobody, as Trey Bauer told us back in season 1 of the Blue White Tailgate podcast. Michael Zordich and Teague Brown are my top safeties of all time at Penn State. We
should probably mention also Marcus Allen. Did anybody mention him?
You mentioned Marcus Allen. Yeah.
Did I mention him? Okay. He was almost a linebacker.
He would be down my list as top 10 at safety, but those are kind of my top guys, with Teague Brown being up. I'm with you with Alan Zamitis is number 1 at corner. Joey Porter, number 2, just because Joey was a little bit handsy. And then I got Richard Gardner at number 3, followed by Brian Scott, Bryan, number 32, who had the worst number as a corner.
Yeah, second round draft pick, so he was up there maybe more than people realize. David Macklin was also really good back in the time. And maybe one of the best hitters is James the Hitman Boyd, if you remember.
James Boyd at safety. Nobody hit harder than James Boyd. And Brian Scott come from corner at Penn State to outside linebacker. So, guys, that's all I got. It's all to Penn State, and we'll revisit everything. So thanks a lot for joining us on this edition of the Blue White Tailgate Podcast. Email the show, bluewhitetailgatepawcast@gmail.com. For Frank, Mike, I'm Andrew Gusta. We'll see you in a couple of days.